Okay, hello Pixel Pushers, it's Sadiq Hussain here with another creative tutorial with Affinity Photo to create this montage of characters that we can cut out from their respective backgrounds and put them with a drop shadow onto a totally neutral and uniform background. Okay, so we can see these three different characters. Incidentally, this was from Birmingham's own Comic-Con just today. So these are all cosplayers, all willing to have their photographs taken and of course display their love of the various characters that they've come to dress up as. And so these were taken earlier today, but of course you know that when you're in an exhibition hall, the background isn't always ideal, as you can see from this image. And what we're going to do is essentially use the selection tool to select. Now, we have done videos before to highlight the actual selection process, so I'm not going to go through that 3 times, but I will go through it once more just with this image. But essentially we'll have done that with this one. I'll explain why there's 2 copies there a bit later on, and with that one already. So let's start with this one to actually make a selection. I prefer the selection tool, selection brush tool. So just be mindful of, if you use this tool, is to just make sure that the brush is not too large and obviously not too small, because that takes up a bit more time to do the selection. So the key thing here is to use a brush that's large enough to cover the area quickly, but not too large so it overspills. Okay, now we've got a reasonably neutral and even background here, so the selection process actually will be pretty easy and good, but there will be areas like, for example here, that little lapel detail, little flap detail, which isn't quite been captured properly. I'm just pressing the space bar down to give me the grab handle here, the move handle. That just speeds up the process. This isn't too bad. It's done it reasonably well, but we will fine tune that there and here as well. So just reduce the size of the brush, and we just push in that selection. There we go. Now here it hasn't selected the inside, but we'll come back to that in a moment. We're okay, we don't need to go below the knee particularly because of the way I'm going to lay it in the composite. Zoom in, make sure you zoom in. Okay, I think, now can you see we've just made a mistake there. If we do click on subtract up there, which is the context sensitive part of the tool, that'll sort it. So it's subtract or add up here. Go back to add, control and 0 or command and 0 on a Mac to fill the image to full screen. Okay, we can fine tune that, but for now we're happy with that broad selection. So click on refine, and I can't stress this enough, always use the refine option for a couple of reasons. This is one, so we want to make sure that flap is selected, so make sure the matte is option is selected, and just make the brush again the right size, and that then reselects that to make sure that we're getting the right amount of detail. Now here it isn't quite right, so we want to tell the software that the background, click on the background tab there, that is the background behind him. So if we just paint in here, don't need to be super accurate about painting to the edge, because the software will fill in the detail for you. Okay, so do that. All this helps to fine tune the selection that we've already done, and this refine option is really important. So don't be afraid to zoom in and actually get to almost a pixel level. and get that selection right. And obviously you'd want to spend a bit more time to getting it right. I'm not rushing it, but I'm obviously doing it so that the video doesn't end up too long. But you spend as much time as necessary. So again, reduce the size of that. Pretending that's the background. Okay. And I think that's pretty much done. We're happy with that selection. Right. Here now, what you need to be mindful of is you don't want to, well, you can, but it's a good idea to always opt for the output to be the selection on a new layer, okay, rather than just a selection, because that always gives you an option to have a look at what the image, the cutout part of the image looks like. Click apply, give it a few seconds, and you can see straight away. And if you have left some like artifacts of pixels here, you'll be able to see it easier, because of course you've got a neutral background, because he's copied it on a layer on its own. And then just use the eraser tool and just erase out any rogue pixels that we don't need. Okay, so again, take your time to get this right. I would go through and do that carefully, but again, what you might want to do is just go in there and just delete some of those pixels. Okay, that's it, and that's fine. A few more there. Okay, now we zoom right in there, so it's not as if you're going to really see that, but just to give you an idea. So now that we've selected it really carefully, it's on its own layer. We go to the move tool, so that selects that image, and we can obviously move it about, and all we want to do is copy it essentially. So Command and C or Control and C, and we'll go to that's the end result we want. If I just rewind that back and say that's how we started with is a blank document, and on the blank document we're going to use the rectangle tool and put a color fill on it. You can have it white if you want to, but let's just make it a bit more interesting. And I quite like a nice grey, so just make it a bit darker this time. Okay, so just using the fill option here, changing it to whatever colour you want. Now we'd already copied that one image, so if we do Command and V to paste it, and make sure that the move tool is selected, and obviously depending on the document size you've created and the source image, the two will vary in their size relatively. So if you need to resize it. If you want to resize the canvas that you're putting it on, do that. That's entirely up to you. So let's just pop this gentleman here, and right now to create the drop shadow, what we need to do is to copy that. So resize it first, get it roughly where you want it. You can fine tune it afterwards, then do Control and C or Command and C, depending on if you're a Mac or PC, and then and V. So what we've now got is two versions of him. Okay, so just move him over here for now. And what we want to do is make that into a shadow. Okay, now there's a couple of things we need to do. We need to go to the Effects tab on the right here next to the layers, and there's a couple of things we need to do. One is Color Overlay. So the first one is Color Overlay. So click that and just pop that out so we can see it a bit better. Make sure it's black, that the Color Overlay is black, because shadows tend to be black, although they can be a different color depending on the light source and the way the light reacts. But for now, we're looking at for it to be black. Now you can make it. You might be tempted to say, oh, I'm going to reduce the opacity, but we don't reduce the opacity of the overlay. We reduce the opacity of that layer afterwards. So leave it at full strength. The next thing we want to do is blur it. So shadows very rarely have sharp edges. So what we want is to click on Gaussian blur and just increase that to a desired effect. We'll leave it about there. Let's say about 50%, I think, from experience sort of works well. But 30 to 40, 50%, something like that. Click close. So what we've done, we've added a black overlay and we've added Gaussian blur to it. Okay, and go back to the layers palette. So we've got this layer, which is the person, and then the converted into a shadow. Now, of course, what we can do is to move that. Now that needs to be behind him, obviously. So we grab that layer and position it between the person's layer and the background. So it's now behind him. So now when you move it, it will be, and depending on where the light source is coming from for your main subject, if it's coming from the top left, then obviously the shadow needs to be bottom right. Sometimes just adding a shadow or only slightly offset works much better than doing something that's offset a lot. But that's for you to decide what works best for you, what effect you want to try and achieve. And then, of course, if you want to reduce the opacity now, we just click on the opacity. Make sure your shadow layer is selected and go to opacity here and just reduce it, because you don't want it to be too harsh. Again, around about 50% works well. So again, select it and you can move it. You can see that shadow and that works really well. So we just pop it just there. And of course, we do the same thing with the others, exactly the same. This one's already cut out, and we're just going to select that, copy it, pop it into here, paste it, again resize it. This is exactly what I did when you saw that finalized montage earlier. And if you want to suggest depth and somebody being further away or closer to you, you can obviously have the size slightly different. But if they're meant to be in the same plane from camera, then clearly you want the head, the ears, the eyes to be roughly the same sort of size. So if you want to just reduce the opacity of the layer down so you can see that they do match in size, and then bring the opacity back up again, that will help. And then we can say maybe put him down here, or put him there. Let's put him here. In fact, we'll just reduce him a bit more. Okay, and then when we've positioned it, then we do a copy and paste, and that's the shadow that we're going to have. Same principle. Go to make sure that layer selected, go to effects, go to color overlay, make sure it's black, which it is, go to Gaussian blur and blur it to about 50%. Obviously do them the same. If they're on the same document, then blur them and the opacity to the same, because that way they'll be consistent and it'll help sell the final composite. Again, you want this to be underneath, so go back to layers and position that underneath the main image, offset slightly, and then reducing the opacity. Again, we said about 50%. That's it. So those are consistent. Okay, now the thing to do here is that once you're happy with the shadow and the position, you want to combine for each character. So for example, that one, the Indiana Jones and its shadow, select both using Command or Control on your keyboards, and the mouse button, and then just right click and say group, and they are together now. Okay, and the same with this one, the next character, and then right click and group. And what that allows you to do now, of course, is that when you move them, the shadow will move with it. When you resize, the shadow will resize. Okay, so position it, get it right first, especially the foreground and the shadow, and then group them together. You can ungroup them if you wanted to. You can just ungroup there in the same menu, so it's not fixed. And then of course you do the same with the last image, with whichever image. So Control and copy, or Command and copy, and then into your composite area, and do V. Again, it's a large image, a large file relative to the document I've created, but that's not a bad thing because it allows you the flexibility to resize and fit how you want to. And of course, ultimately, it depends on whether the document is meant for printing purposes eventually, or whether it's just an exercise a digital exercise, or or what purpose what resolution you want. So again, get the proportions right, roughly. So we'll say that's a bit large, so just reduce it, position it where we want. Okay, so let's say we'll position them there. Obviously, you can have them overlapping if you want to. When it's where you got it, when you got it where you want it, then Control or Command and C, and then Control, Command and V. That gives us a duplicate. Same principle, effects, overlay, make sure it's black, overlay color overlay, and then go to Gaussian blur, and same number, about 50, or whatever works, and then go to layer, change its opacity down to 50 again, and then of course select that shadow layer and then position it. Okay, now it's above it, so we want to make sure it's below the main image, so it's then behind it, and then it gives it a little bit of an offset, so it's hardly anything. You don't want it all the way there, because the light source is what dictating that, but keeping consistent. All of them should be consistent. Again, group them, so group these, right click and group. So you've got 3 characters grouped together. And obviously, if you wanted to change the exposure, the white balance, the colors for each layer so that they all match, you can obviously do that. Now, looking at it, this particular character, because of where he is and where this character is, there's a bit missing here. So what I might do is I actually might decide to increase the size and then put him here, then increase his size. So this is what gives you the flexibility then to alter the relative sizes and positions of each of the characters when you've grouped the shadow with the main character or object. Of course, it doesn't have to be a person, it could be any object. And once that's done, we're finished. So that's a great way of combining, combining characters, and that's better, into one background. Of course, we could put a border around it, we could put an overlay around it, but we'll look at that next time. So for now, have a go at doing that, and good luck, and share your results, and any feedback or comments or different ways of doing it would be greatly appreciated for all those people who are watching this particular method. So thank you very much, and happy editing.